We were really impressed and grateful for the thought that you all put into those responses. And they were very interesting. And so we were running those quotes kind of on a loop behind us, and also some of the statistics about how important water technology is, what are some of the key program elements which are more important than others, and some kind of general observations. We're going to make that available on the website and also the mobile application. I know that you probably noticed all the technology going on around to my left in the corner here. We were running a webcast and a Twitter chat. We had quite a lot of participation, I think over a dozen countries. And so this was this table over here was the focus of the webcast, but obviously we've got another camera here that we've been in the morning doing the questions and answers, and now we're going to be doing the report out. So what I'd like to do is, for each table, I'm going to go table by table and question by question. And I'd like one person from each table, we're going to do kind of a pass the mic, to distill the 2 or 3 key elements per question, especially those that would affect the program design. How can we improve this? What did we get right? What can we do better? How can we be more engaged? How can we be more participatory? So for the first question, do I have a table that's willing to volunteer for question 1? And question 1 was, why do you think technology hasn't played a greater role in reducing water scarcity in the food value chain? Volunteer. Otherwise, I pick someone. So it's always better to have a volunteer. Okay.
So, hi everyone, I'm Anna Rosendahl. I'm head of the Unit for Private Sector Collaboration and ICT at SIDA. So the first question, right? What was the question? Yes. So this table said that distribution, lack of business models is one problem. No maintenance, follow-up, repair. And affordability, also difficult to scale. There are technologies, but difficult to scale them. And also there is no proper enabling environment in these countries.
This table, can I just go in order?
Thank you. My name is Thomas Bodström. I'm from SIDA, working with the Loan and Guarantees unit. To summarize the first reflections from the question number 1. One was that it is actually not the main problem. There are more overarching problems which is the cause of this. The second one is a bit contradictory, but it says it actually does. That the question isn't really framed properly, or it is assumed that technology doesn't provide any help, but it truly does. We saw also that the lack of information of technologies around and how you can spread the information is one problem. Lack of finance, the upfront costs for investment, distribution, and getting to the smallholders to use it. And one comment was that it's a complex value chain, the whole food sector. So this is just taking apart one part of the whole problem, which a little bit binds to the first note there, that this is not perhaps the main problem. Anything you want to add? Yeah.
I'd just like to add a couple of words. And I was the one who said, okay, why do you think technology hasn't played a greater role? I think it's a bit from the northern side of the world to say technology has not played a role. It does play a very important role. There's a lot of adaptive technology around in food and agriculture and water. So I think it's very important to frame this in the right way, so to make it, in order to make it a real program which has impact locally.
Thanks. This table. Anybody?
At our table, we discussed that technology really needs an enabling environment. Regulations help that enabling environment. and specifically access to financing, markets, including market information, market understanding. We talked a lot about market research, and then also the rest of the enabling mechanisms, the other infrastructure that goes along with that technology. Does anyone have anything else to add?
Kind of like the point that was made on the first, or actually on this table, about existing technologies. One of the points is, in terms of food security and technologies, one of the sort of hidden, it's disguised in terms of groundwater in South Asia, how important groundwater has been to food security. If you go back to the late 80s, before groundwater was developed, these were very food insecure countries. And groundwater development, particularly the pumps and the different variations of that, have had a huge impact where there was no investments in public irrigation through that period, but the technology of groundwater, particularly the pumping, had a big impact on food security and enhancing food security. So there are good examples. Of course, that then has to be mitigated. There's other issues that now have emerged around that, but again, stressing this point that was made on that table, that technology does play a very important role in food security and water.
Great. This table over here. Thanks.
Thank you. In our team, we had the benefit of having 2 aide colleagues who had been part of the design, so we had some advantage of that. But in general, we talked about this, and the key conclusion we had is that we think technology plays a huge role, and it does, as several colleagues have said here, but it differs very much on which market you are in. So our conclusion is that we have to look at it from a market perspective. It's very different to work, for example, in Eastern Africa from the Middle East or in Southern India or any other countries. It's very specific technology solutions that you can look at, and one have to have a good knowledge on that market to promote it and see scale up in this type of space. We also, like many others said, obviously a key challenge here is a barrier is that the regulatory frameworks are not often very conducive for business in general, and that is a barrier that one have to address. But again, that barrier is also very different from different parts of the world. In some areas it's easy to scale up, in some areas it's not. So that regulatory framework also need a good market knowledge in order to promote it and dismantle the barrier. Same goes for we talked a lot about incentives for this, and of course there's depending on which type of company or private sector player you are looking at, it depends on the scale of those. We talked about the large-scale multinationals that have a huge penetration in their supply chains, outgrower level. They have a certain need, and their need might be partly finance, but not always. They might need be in use of advice and guidance as well. And then compared to the small-scale outgrowers, for example, that are not part of a larger ecosystem, and they need a lot of different types of support just to create a simple business model and go to a bank and get a loan to start up. So it's very context specific. So we think technology is important, yes, but we think a deepened market analysis is very, very important here, and the understanding of who the actual players and customers are. Thanks.
Great, over here.
Thank you. I think we have not so much to additional information to contribute with. Most of what we discussed here have been mentioned and said by other groups. Just underlining the issue about the water as the value of water. It's difficult as different groups place different value on the water, even whether it's a value or not, or it's something taken for granted. Another important issue we discussed here was the multi-stakeholder work, where there's still quite a lot of different misunderstandings and so on between different groups, and it's a challenge of bringing all these together, speaking the same language. And a key issue there is time time to build confidence, time to build trust, time to build competence also. Thank you.
First, we'd like to say thank you to all of those that joined us online from Uganda, Ghana, US, Sweden, and the Netherlands. We did appreciate you joining our conversation, both through the online chat and through the Twitter feed, and we're going to try to integrate your comments into our discussion here as well. The main thing that we would add to what's already been said is failures of technologies in the past, that technologies weren't critically integrated into the local design and not with user-centered design. And so NGOs and others who have tried to implement technologies in the past have had a lot of failures and therefore don't want to try to do this anymore because they've had so many failures with technology in the past. As one of the reasons that it's not playing a greater role, because people have tried this capacity building piece, but because there wasn't a lot of understanding of the new technologies or use of those technologies, they didn't have a greater role. They have not been used a little bit more at this point. Does anybody want to add anything?
Okay, great. There were several common themes, I think, that everybody probably heard. The complexity of the systems, that this was addressing one piece of a very holistic system. The importance of the enabling environment, both the legal and regulatory side and distribution. And it was nice to hear the resounding the conversation that technology has played a really important role. And you know, it's great for all of us to think about how we can help through this program technology play an even greater role. Whether it's you know, existing technologies and improving the distribution into developing countries, understanding the demand and customer needs, or making sure that there's a user-centered design. So those were some common elements that came up during the discussion. Okay, let's move to question 2. Does a different table want to start, or do we want to just go around again? We willing to go around again? All right, let's start over here, question 2.
Yes. Do you see opportunities to use technologies and business models sourced by securing water for food in your on-the-ground programs? Yes, was the answer in this group from USAID and from Embassy of Sweden in Kenya. We said that there might be good opportunities to focus regionally, and also it will be a good complement to already ongoing programs. Yes.
Succinct answer is always welcome. The answer is yes.
Yeah, I think we'll join the former group and say that yes, that these technologies will have and provide some direct benefit on the ground in their programs. Then we have actually additional discussions in how to make them better, and that could be, don't forget the use of the mobile technology, which actually could spread the word and use that as an information source as to educate and to help with the implementation, and also make value of what that information can contribute to. We talked about wastewater reuse, and one question was how is that going to be inclusive for companies which not are in the food value chain? And that is an important factor because you have textile manufacturers who actually use water, and that water can be reused. How do they yak into this program or this challenge fund? And finally, we were talking about remote censoring, that this has to do with also with the spread of information. That could be censoring of quality, censoring of quantity, which is important feedback to decision makers. So it's not only small farm holders, there are also municipalities and governments who can use these models and techniques. And finally, we had a question about how climate models should be integrated into this, because climate model will provide some kind of planning tool how a long-term water management plan can be implemented alongside with these techniques. Thank you.
We discussed several examples, solar pumps, wind pumps being some of them. opportunities for technologies and business models to be implemented into on-the-ground work. Integrating operational data for pumps and the interplay with some of the organizations that have been taking data from the field and feeding them back into databases or getting that information back out to farmers, and develop such business models, synergies between business models and technologies. So this gets back to, I think somebody mentioned systems approach, integrating the business aspect and the technology itself. And down here we do reiterate the need for market research, capacity to perform market research, and the systems approach in general.
In our group, we had a couple of discussions on this question. Actually, generally speaking, we think that technology, or the answer is yes, but technology is not the main issue. Normally, in these kind of processes, technology is there. It is proven, or in many cases. The innovation is more on to have the right parties on board and to organize your consortium in such a way that it really works on field level, on all levels. And of course, business models should be the driver there. It should work also in that sense. So that's a key element in that.
Yes, not much to add this time either. Yes, we think so. But there's one more comment. I think we talked about spreading the word about this Grand Challenge Fund. It's an important issue to make good proposals coming in. So we propose that everyone here representing different organizations take this with them and sort of become an ambassador for this Grand Challenge Fund to spread the word about this opportunity. Thank you.
Yeah, there wasn't much to add to the overall discussion. We thought that the business models were out there, that there were some that are already going in on-the-ground programming, and we expected that to continue.
I have just one small comment on the technology side. I think the challenge for the government, the donors, and everybody is, are we willing to pay for the innovation? And what is the definition for innovation? Because as a company, we spend $200 million upfront each year for development of the products. So when I look at what the requirements on the market is always low-cost products. And then they keep us out of the market because we cannot compete with low-cost innovations. So we have to kind of also take into consideration this discussion. Are we willing to pay for the technology is sustainable and can change the behavior of consumer and contribute to the water security? It is the main question.
It was really great to hear that the resounding answer seemed to be yes, and several of the tables actually came up with very specific examples. And those examples also help us address question one, which is, why has technology maybe not played as large of a role as we would like, or new technology playing a role, or how does new technology help us actually get the word out or improve training around existing water technologies? So question three was, in your on-the-ground experience, what are some key technology incubators or accelerators that you've worked with, and have you come across any that work specifically with water technology entrepreneurs? We're asking you to really dig into your Rolodexes with this one.
Yes, RTI, Research Triangle Institute, had come across one program which was not very successful, so we didn't write it down on the white board. But USAID has been approached by Mohammed Yunus, who has ideas about entrepreneurs addressing certain problems in societies, which could be water. And then also organization IDE, working on water irrigation systems, yes, in Africa and Asia. Yes, that was it.
Sorry, I accidentally kept the mic for that one.
Thank you. We had a Dutch example of a team that was hired from a professional business support group to work 1.5 days with the development of water techniques. So that's one model that could be advocated. It's finding professionals which are in the business and then getting some time from them and building a team. Concrete examples that we looked at was BRAC. I haven't heard of them before, but that was recommended. We could also use local MFIs, which have the ability to judge business models and actually do lending to small companies. You should also try to look at use local universities, and the fact that that we are the more partners we are, the more possibilities there are to use local networks. So some examples and some tips. Thanks.
Oh, just to add one comment, I think if you look at the if you increase the efficiency of water use for farmers, for instance, so so you improve water efficiency and water capturing and storage, and that helps farmers to create a better yield. That already brings you a better ROI for them. So their yield increases, so they make more profit, so they can actually then techniques make sense. So it's always what type of business model works for them, and then to involve the whole value chain, so the people who then take that product from them and are of course willing to pay for it. So if you look at the whole value chain and you start to improve and bring technology into this sector, then it would work.
Yeah, one of the examples we discussed was from Nicaragua, where I was working in the mid-90s on the Bomba de Mecate, the rope pump, which was is now quite a successful business, multinational business, I think, but it was initially prime started, or it was invested through Swiss development assistance. So we said we needed some kind of angel investor almost, and they were quite successful in differentiating their market. So they had a range of pumps from quite robust, heavy lift ones for farmers all the way down to quite small ones for single families. But it took a long time, 10 years or so, to really get it off the ground and get it commercially viable. But now it produces, thousands and thousands of pumps, and it's one of the sector standards. So quite successful. But time, I think, and an angel investor, perhaps.
Another, excuse me, another example was Jane Irrigation, and the real accomplishment there is, again, having a range of options addressing both the large scale and the small scale producer.
We talked about several different examples, but in 3 segments essentially. One was in the financial advisory services segment. Some of us have worked with different companies. I'm not sure if you should mention too many names, with companies like Bloomberg and others that are doing a lot of work in this space. Also, many of us have worked with the different large-scale multinationals, and many of them are engaged in the 2030 Water Resources Group, for example, and then they have this long supply chains where they penetrate really local markets, Tetra Pak and Saab Miller and others. And then a third segment we talked about is the type of R&D work that many of us do. For example, our own work at SCI, where we work on bioenergy development in Liberia, Nigeria, and many countries with local companies in developing their supply chains in terms of biofuels. Also on ecological sanitation, for example, working Addis Ababa and trying to define what's the business model to have agriculture fertilizing, for example, from ecological sanitation products, and also energy. So sort of 3 segments in that maybe my colleague would like to add.
Yeah, just a little bit. Maybe it's, in my opinion, not that much on the technology itself, but it's more on the process, which is really important and a key success factor. There should be short-term and long-term results, but short-term impact is important as well. Yeah, and time. I agree fully with my colleague over there. The time is really, really important. You should be a bit patient to get results. That's it for the moment.
We also had WRI at the table, and they have a program called New Ventures that we should be looking at. So, and they offered to do that.
Right. In our group, we didn't come up with many concrete examples. However, what we talked about was that, especially among non-governmental organizations, there's a lot of work being done in developing technologies, ideas, and methods, which holds a great potential to be further developed or in combination developed from an entrepreneurial point of view. And I think that is quite important to remember that yeah, there's a great potential also there for cooperation.
We didn't talk about this one as much, but one of the things that's come up before is there are more than a few NGOs and organizations that are working in this space around water technologies, especially in the U.S. and Imagine H2O, Clean Tech, and others. And then there are other research organizations, research water technologies that are actually helping some of these business enterprises get off the ground and get the information they need to go to some of these other new and developing markets.
The examples around the tables have been great, the very specific examples. I thought that there were the key kind of takeaways, I liked the quote, the more partners, the more possibilities. And I hope that that holds not only true for the Securing Water for Food team, but also everybody around the table to have learned more about accelerators and incubators working in this space and how you can integrate them into your own on-the-ground programs. And then the concept of lessons learned, not just like pulling out the Rolodex, but that you really delve deeply into what have been the lessons from some of these accelerators, some of these organizations. How can we take those lessons learned into this program? And you know, the idea of really understanding, even from failed examples, those are usually the best examples to learn from. So it's great that you not only answered the question, but that you got into those key issues. The fourth question was a long one, and I imagine that this one generated some of the most conversation about the number of the specific challenges faced by water entrepreneurs and scaling in general, and whether or not these barriers were accurate, which was the single biggest barrier, and what the most important thing that this program, Securing Water for Food, could do to help overcome the barrier. I'm actually going to start on this side of the room so that we don't hear so much, oh, we don't have anything more to add. That can be Anne Charlotte's line this time.
So we had many things that came up through the chats. One being distribution, the lack of business models, not the proper environment, intro and finance, that there isn't a common language that NGOs and innovators are using to address this space, and that it's NGO, it should be innovator-led, and people online were commenting that it seems to be donor-led rather than innovator-led, and there needs to be a change of mindset around that. In addition, those online were talking about how we can better involve and engage the end user early in the process, and that if that isn't going to be a part of this, then this probably won't work.
Right. We talked a lot about these issues, as most groups did, I suppose. I think we all agree that the issues listed here in the document are very relevant and very important. What we focused, or what we mostly discussed about, was actually sort of coming just before all these points comes up, and that's more the ground laying work, the context analysis. Is the policy and regulatory framework, are those things in place for the entrepreneurs to come in and act? multi-stakeholder discussions on watershed level, for instance, are those in place? Are people talking? Are they understanding each other? Those issues, lacking of understanding of culture and communication. We agreed that these things are very important, that they are in place and that people fully understand what is going to happen and what is happening before getting into actual work. And of course, also always keeping in mind that whenever we go in and try to support change, that we always keep the sustainability issue in mind, that whatever we do, eventually we will pull out, and it's important to already from the start keep in mind that sustainability is important and that something remains when we eventually leave.
So I think we came up with a few things. One is, and I think key, and Ku brought it up earlier, but to talk to the people that we're targeting and to get their insights, because we can assume, but we can't speak for them. And so to really, really spend a lot of time getting inputs from the entrepreneurs and the innovators that we want to focus on. And make sure it's worth their time to apply. The key barriers are those that we've listed. We talked about the importance of the applicants to come to us with an understanding of the barriers and how they plan to overcome them. And then another really interesting thing that came up was to think about water in a broader way, and that water is too cheap or has no value or isn't priced appropriately in a lot of countries. So how can we connect it to other issues of concern to help overcome some of the barriers that we face?
So our group, we wrote supply chains and markets up there on the front, on the top. However, we discussed almost an overarching concept of the need for, and it relates back to what's been previously said, understanding of the markets, understanding of the inputs and the outputs, and a systems approach to dealing with the problem. So the technology is needed and it's a component, but you need to understand how that technology interacts with the truly complex system that you're engaging in. A couple other items that we mentioned, that challenges are highly contextualized. They differ greatly between communities. Systems that can adapt and respond to changes and stressors would obviously be the most resilient, and that is another aspect of your system. And produce in response to the markets. So we talked about donor-driven should be driven by the people, but also by the markets in the areas that we're implementing.
Thank you. The fourth question is actually a set of sub-questions. So what we did was to divide all these sub-questions up, and everybody was asked to respond with a scale 1 to 10, which is the most important one. And that the result was that we found that the most important barriers or problems are the infrastructure, the poorly developed supply chains, and the lack of distribution networks, together with high upfront investment costs. The lowest barrier was actually the lack of confidence that developing countries have the market mechanisms for necessary growth, and that is something that actually works for the program, which we all, I think, agree upon, that there is there's great potential for new technologies. Thanks.
Yes. I will not repeat what others have already said, but we also talk about the risk that the fund receives a lot of applications from middle-income countries instead of the poorest or the most difficult countries. And then Annette in our group came up with a good idea to have financial incentives, perhaps ask for a lower part of co-funding if you're applying for funds in a more difficult context or area. Yeah, I think that was the only one we could add.
Well, it sounds like the program designers definitely have some barriers to add to the list, and it sounds like it was a really rich discussion. So for the last question, how can we improve the design of the program to ensure that new investments, technologies, and business models are inclusive? In other words, that they benefit poor people. And let's start over here one more time.
Some of the things that we came up with were that they should come to us with an understanding of the local context as a presupposition for their application. So if they didn't understand the local context, they probably were not going to get funding. Another thing was that if they had already done some consumer design on the front end and or some market research on the front end, they were more likely to be successful than if they had not. And then the last thing we had talked about was having more of these type sessions, but in some of the local contexts, such that we can get more people applying who understand that local context, and therefore we can improve the design of the program that way. So it was more around the criteria and the outreach efforts than anything else from this table. And from online, it was a lot of the same thing, that we need to make sure that social innovators have the lead voice and that we as development agencies have a smaller voice but are providing the capital as a catalyst.
Yes, thank you. So some participants stressed the need to be very clear on what is expected from the different partners for, in this context. What are the results expected? In a very clear way, and I think it's also what the colleagues said about explaining, that you need to really explain what is the grand challenge and how does it work and so on. It's the first point. The second point is a link with energy issues. Some of, or almost all technologies for desalination work or for water efficiency are quite energy intensive, and it's also a criteria for selecting a technology is how energy intensive it is, and is there any energy services to operate this technology in the country.
Thank you. Can I add two issues to this? We thought that it would benefit the program if we could focus quite a lot on some certain specific regions or particular markets and build up relationships, for example, with export agencies. Say an example could be the East African community as one example, to focus on that and such a region. And the second one, we said, also try to focus quite clearly on the type of private sector and the type of companies one would like to target. Perhaps open windows for multinationals or SMEs in these certain regions to make it very practical for those companies and other innovators that have to prepare the proposals. Thanks.
Yeah, I just want to emphasize that a little bit. There was a lot of talk at this table about linking up to supply chains, and we thought that was key in terms of being able to catalyze real change in the period of time that we have, and in terms of having an exit strategy. And so bringing in, not just the Coca-Colas, but the companies like Diageo, et cetera, into this conversation and understanding how they can be part of it is key. Local presence is key, so just to reiterate that point, local presence, local understanding. We had some conversation about some of the kind of prerequisites that we've put into the call right now around matching funds. And I think what's resonated throughout the discussions today has been the importance of doing that, but also the importance of partnership, and that it takes time. And so there was a recommendation made that the matching funds should be required, but should be required 6 months into the program, and that we need to ensure that the applicants have an understanding of the types of partnerships that they're looking for, an understanding of the supply chains that they may fit into, et cetera, but that may take them time to do that. And so, and facilitation. And so we may want to make that a requirement, but once again, make that a requirement 6 months or 12 months into the program. Yeah.
the need for market research, and I always get feedback when that happens. We also discussed the need for sustainable financing, whether that be microfinance or other forms of financing, utilizing the systems that are in place and building those up, reinforcing those systems, and the role of targeted subsidies, whether or not those should play a role in perhaps low-interest financing, low-interest loans. And then we also discussed, especially at the end, gender considerations. So not simply for inclusion of marginalized gender groups, but also to specifically address that component of this complex system, the role of the female farmer, community savings groups that are predominantly run by females. Of course, it varies by community and should come out in the market research.
Okay, thank you. I guess when you're at group number 4, a lot of people have said the same things before, but some of the things that came up in our group was that we really felt it was important that the evaluation criteria include evaluating that there are the right partnerships on the ground for the applicants who are applying for the fund. And I think that means not just sort of I think that also includes relationships with communities and relationships with governments. I think it's really hard to just kind of integrate a great idea, into an area or a place where you maybe really don't understand the culture and the context. I think that's also part of the screening process as well. It's really important to be screening technologies, especially for technologies that can actually work in developing country contexts, because sometimes there's really exciting technology. It could actually be, what you might consider a silver bullet, but it's something that's can't be affordable, or maybe it requires electricity in a place where electricity isn't. So I think those are the two major things we talked about. We also talked about earlier, not in response per se to this question, but how do we ensure that there's a meaningful partnership between private sector, large corporate companies that maybe have some of the supply chains and distribution networks that are required to make this kind of a program a success, feel like they actually have a meaningful role to play in this type of program. So thank you.
And we talked about the difficulty to reach local entrepreneurs and how to support them in the application process, perhaps using local organizations or the embassies, just to reach the entrepreneurs that actually have the local knowledge. We also talked about to ask for gender inclusiveness and environmental impact and so on. Yeah, I think all the other things we talked about have been mentioned already. Yeah.
Well, throughout all of these
I think what we also said was that we need to ask for specific indicators from the applicants, from the entrepreneurs, so we know how to measure that they are really inclusive and they are really reaching the people living in poverty and so forth.
Throughout all of the conversations and the report outs, there were some themes across all of the questions, and I'm sure that you all heard them. We heard them repeated several times. The idea that this program needs to be innovator-led, which requires us to have conversations with the people that we're trying to reach before we put this program out. For final. The repeated comments about the need for the program to be market-driven and based in market research. Partnership came up, I think, a dozen times. I stopped putting little tick marks next to the time partnerships came up. And I think that one of the things that I heard is that we're talking about partnerships at multiple levels. We're talking about partnerships with the private sector, with NGOs, with research, with academia, with R&D, with communities. And I think that your identification of those types of partnerships will greatly help us in finalizing the program. The notion that the program needs to be highly contextualized and responsive to local needs, and on that same vein, the notion of user-centered design came up multiple times throughout all 5 questions. The importance of the understanding of the enabling environment came up a lot in the first 3 questions, and I want to make sure that we highlight that. And the last that came up, especially in the last question, was around the criteria and the importance of the criteria, communicating with applicants, the importance of indicators so that we know what we're evaluating and what we're choosing to source, select, and scale. Were there any did anybody want to make any closing remarks? I know we've kept you here for a long time. The conversation was, this has been, I think, I can't speak for USAID or CETA, but I think that it's given the program designers quite a lot to think about. And as we have this call out for comment, we really appreciate you guys sticking with us for a couple of hours today. We would very much appreciate if you would all go to securingwaterforfood.org and do written comments, questions, and answer the questions that we've asked everybody to answer in the request for information. Also, as I mentioned, we're on Twitter, so please follow us on Twitter as well. And what I'd really hope is that these kinds of conversations, the ones that we've had today and the ones that we'll continue to have over the next several weeks, continue, and that we can call on you and that you'll call on us with your best ideas, and that we can have this be a back and forth so we can make Securing Water for Food the program that I hope we all know it can be. So with that, thank you again so much for sticking with us, and I hope that you all enjoy the rest of World Water Week. Don't forget to comment.